My name is Saroop Singh, formerly Justin Williams. I see my Zoom defaulted today to that, so some people know me by that. I've been at the Southside Home Movie Project since 2020, um, and it's been my pleasure now to serve as the assistant director. I'm here today to present on what we call a presentation I've had the honor to give at a couple locations nationally now. But it feels really special to bring this home to Chicago, particularly at the Black Metropolis Research Consortium, a movie camera in Bronzeville, the Newsreel-ettes of the Raymond Williams collection. For those of us that aren't as familiar with the Southside Home Movie Project, we are based at the University of Chicago. We were founded by our director, Jacqueline Stewart, who is a professor of cinema and media studies and an early Black film scholar. Her work has taken not only her, but Black images and Black cinema to new levels of appreciation and platforms, including her leadership now at the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures and Arts and Sciences. But also, she had an early interest and focus on the non-theatrical filmmaking culture of African Americans, particularly on Chicago's South Side. So in 2005, she started the Southside Home Movie Project to do the work of collecting these primary sources. You shoot it in the camera, and the film that comes out the camera is the only copy that there is. These things were being lost, thrown away, dying in basements and attics, and she believed that there was two things possible if we look at these images. One, we would see a new form of filmmaking that focused on the non-theatrical space as a place for entertainment and for sharing. Particularly, that may be the home living room, that may be the basement attic, that may be the church. But these films were produced to document Black communities and to represent themselves in the moving image. Secondly, the more recent images and history of the South Side of Chicago do not paint the intentionality, the complexity, and the love by which these communities were mostly established during roughly the same time period that celluloid film, which is 8mm 16 and Super 8, was used as a primary home movie documentation method. So you can see here, we have films that represent that range of use from 1929 to 1982. And we're glad to say we now have over 1,000 films in our archive. Today, everything I'm going to show you is silent, so don't freak out if you can't hear anything. 95% of the home movies were silent when they were made. Sound would come along in 1973 and become a lot more accessible during videotape. So this is what home movies look like. If you've never seen them, or you're curious if this is what you've got in your collection, they can come in cans, they can come in cardboard boxes made by the manufacturer. They have sometimes labels, sometimes they don't have any labels. We receive them in whatever condition that they're in. We work closely, intimately with donors to make them partners in the process of processing. So our cataloging work basically begins with our first conversation and doesn't end. It basically never ends, honestly. This is what film looks like, particularly 16mm film, which is what we'll look at today. This film that you're looking at right now is from another collection, the Miyawaki collection, a Japanese American who was interned and then served in World War II and then resettled on Chicago's South Side. He lived in Lake Meadows, and he shot 16mm film of a church group, which he was a part of. This film is from the 1950s, and I hope you can see that much of the color quality has not been lost. And that is the case for a lot of 16mm film from the 1940s and 50s. Kodachrome is amazingly wonderful with in terms of preserving an image, if even in sometimes adverse conditions. The collection we're going to look at today kind of will definitely be evident of that. We do all things in-house as much as possible, including inspection, which we have space at the Logan Center's Film Studies Vault to work, inspect, preserve, at least physically. And then we also are able to do digitization of all small gauge film, including sound. And we have backups with our partners here at the library at the DLDC, which we're grateful for, as well as the research computing cluster, which makes a lot of this work when it comes to the expense of film digitization pretty much very minimum, and almost would otherwise be thousands of dollars per collection for each donor. And we're able to offer this for free. The place where these films ultimately will live and be accessible are on our website, which we did a revamp of in 2021 to really try to create the space of what it means to actually think of what does the South Side feel like, what was its people, whether it's people, its culture, its ways of making meaning. We hope that you visit it, view our archive, but also see our events, as well as the many creative reuse projects which we've supported or actually co-created with artists and educators. But the other important component of how we think of archiving is archiving in the mind, and then that the archive has to be live. To borrow from, I believe, Patricia Zimmerman's chapter about home movie archives in the web. The archive has to be in relationship with the community that it's meant to serve. And as our director said, it's about putting it back into the consciousness so that history can be alive and move forward. And so our activities are very much structured around exhibition and programming for that effect. And it also ends up positively working for us to actually then receive new collections. Just like the one that I'm talking about today, the Raymond Williams collection. One of the donors came to one of our events, saw Jackie, felt good energy. And I think that's important to say, that it's not just about what we do, but the energy at which we bring it to it. And immediately brought 14 reels to the office in 2019. We didn't have an archivist at the time, and so they sat on a desk. I came in 2020, found these reels, and I could tell it was an unusual collection because it was 16 millimeter film. And just for example, we had about 600 films in our archive at that time across about 24 collections. About 6 of them were actually shot on 16 millimeter by African Americans. The rest were shot by families that had quite a bit of money, so this was very unusual to see 14, and then to see things on the labels like this one, for example. He had a business card. To see a business card with Raymond's name on it, and for it to have this phrase, "For an exact and lasting account, record the occasion on movie film." It immediately piqued my interest. Immediately, I wanted to understand what was going on. And it's very hard to see in pencil, but it actually says Bud Billigan, 1948. So though I had basically received an orphan collection, losing contact with the family, I did a bit of sleuthing and was able to make a connection to one of the sisters, and Rachel Lindsay on the right, and just repeatedly calling her phone number until she realized it wasn't a telemarketer, but it was someone who wanted to talk to her, and she actually thought I was a gardener, and that's a whole nother story. But and I did end up working on her garden, but that's again a whole nother story. But we met up and we built trust so that we can move forward with the proper way to make the deed of gift donation happen, and to do what we love to do, which is to show the films first to the family, and through a private watch party in our office, so that they can encounter their ancestors, their relatives, their loved ones first, as it's meant to be, as it was recorded with that intention, and then they can affirm again if they actually want to make this available to the public. So I also was able to find this photo of Raymond for them and shared with them that day, which I'm sharing with you now too. And it thanked him for making movies of the Bud Billigan picnic as early as 1941. So I wondered why we had this one from 1948. And let's just watch it, and I'll explain kind of why I think Raymond kept this one in particular. So we're seeing images of Chicago Police Department being led by a Black police officer. In the first car is the Grand Marshal, Joe Lewis, and his wife, Marva Lewis. These are troops from the Great Lakes, also being led by a Black officer. That's John Sangstack with the mayor, Ed Kelly at the time. And there's Mr. Bud Billigan himself, David Kellum, live on color film. These are Civil War or Spanish Civil War veterans from 1898, marching at the beginning of the parade. And then we start to see some more of the other things that we're accustomed seeing, like floats. This one's celebrating the 100-year train railroad system. Pepsi Cola is here. At the time, a Black rep brought that float into the parade. We've got our churches. We've got our beauticians and fashion, and children, of course, with their costumes and their little dances. These are some of the social fraternities, the Shriners. We're going to do their own little jig in just a moment. And the parade at this time is taking place on Michigan Avenue. It hadn't yet moved to Parkway or to what is called MLK. And what you'll see is that there are a number of Black businesses, but also royal courts that are part of this. And they're not all from Chicago. A lot of them are coming from places like Memphis, but as far as also as the East Coast, like Philadelphia. Which we know of the power of the Chicago Defender, the newspaper, which sponsored this parade and has continued to. This will be the 95th year. But the Bud Billigan was also a social export to Black America about some of the ideals of which the founder sorry, I'm forgetting names right now. Mr. Abbott and David Kellum were emphasizing around youth, education, development, and also racial pride and entrepreneurship. And so we're seeing this represented. Here's Parker House Sausage with their float. And there are many, many more people and persons which we hope to work in partnership with the community to identify. We've started to begin that process by reaching out to Chicago Defender Charities as to begin sharing these films. So the question of why this film, of all the ones maybe Raymond took, at least knowing he started taking in 1941, we have to look at this particular Bud Billigan. And going back into the Defender archives, we can see that they were covering this parade as they do every year pretty intensely, but more intensely because John Stangstack was on the fund, $1 million fund for Truman to hopefully win the election. John Stangstack takes credit for actually requesting Truman to desegregate the military, which he does 2 weeks before this Bud Billigan that we saw, which explains why some of the troops and the police and the fire department were being led intentionally by Black officers at that time. Why Joe Louis is at the front as the Brown Bomber. Why this is the first ever time that the Bud Billigan is live broadcast on the radio by Jack L. Cooper, the first syndicated Black DJ. This is all things that this one film then made me interested to go look and figure out why do we have it, and it speaks to the power not only of the Defender but also the Bud Billigan to really shape the national image around Blackness at that time. There would be other people who were making movies and making things that look like newsreels at the time, including All American News, which was located here in Chicago and was founded during the war. Interestingly, perhaps after Raymond started his company, and people like William Alexander were able to cross over from being a newsreel filmmaker to actually making his own feature film. And of course, we have the history of filmmaking really having its practice started here in Chicago, and also for Black filmmakers, including Oscar Micheaux, before the 20th century kind of consolidation of it into Hollywood, and made it a lot harder, particularly the sound film industry made it a lot harder for independent filmmakers to actually create films that could compete with things like Cabin in the Sky, those that were being mass produced by the Hollywood system. Raymond is obviously born around this time and is seeing these influences from what we can tell, and he chooses to situate himself somewhere in his own space. He's documenting his community, and documentarians in this form as entrepreneurs or as hobbyists is quite new. He also has a title called ACL, which stands for Amateur Cinema League, which is something that was of international repute, of skill, and you had to be a member to be able to carry that title, and also to use to be in certain competitions and to have certain forms of exhibition. So we see also in this article that he's a well-trained man, a native of Greenville, Mississippi, but also trained and schooled at Wilberforce and also Divide Institute. Unfortunately, this is about all that we know about Raymond, as the family members that we did speak to knew him as kind of their play uncle. He was their dad's friend. He was trained as an electrician. He was one of the first Black members of IBW, as their dad was the first businessman representative of IBW. And so they knew him as a tennis player. They knew him as someone who came and ate their food with them and was around their house. But they didn't know him as this entrepreneur as he was. But as we start to look more at Raymond's films, we start to see other things which maybe he is a part of, this moment of Black Renaissance in Chicago that is seeing a lot of artists start to use whatever instruments that they have to start to convey images about their experiences, thoughts, feelings, emotions from the Great Migration to where they end up and what they're starting to create here in Chicago. And there's been amazing work that has been done a lot by the BMRC and other scholars and artists to really situate Chicago's Black Renaissance alongside New York's. But it was important, and that work is still necessary. For example, the black belt, this derogatory term that was labeled on an area that was deemed, I guess, resigned for African Americans to reside in. These images of Black at the time were seen as a dark mark. But there was those who were actively thinking about how can we reclaim our name and the language on which we describe ourselves. And Bronzeville is what we would rename this part of the city. And there would be artists like Archibald Motley who would be a part of that process, first into exploring the dimensionalities of what is this black belt and what is this life look like. But also there would be, again, the place of the news editors who would start to export images of Black beauty, like the Miss Bronze USA pageant, which began in the early 1930s. This reel is from the 1950s, of which Raymond shot. We're seeing contestants from California, from Delaware, from Texas. Miss Texas is actually the person who wins that year's crown. There were some folks, I believe, even from Minnesota, in a different reel, which you can also see on our website. And there's also a bit of the fashion show that happens at the Washington Park swimming pool. And here's a little bit more of the contestants from Utah.
Saroop, I'm sorry I just want to know if it's possible, we're kind of on a tight schedule. If you could maybe, I don't know how much more left you have. If we could give you a few more minutes to close this.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Okay, no problem. So I'll these reels are all online, so I'll skip it for now. But again, they're also all the events most of the events that we've been able to understand in Raymond's collection are also highly documented in the Defender. And so he's working alongside a class of entrepreneurs, of socialites, of business persons, of politicians who are trying to imagine themselves and Bronzeville as a part of a new way of being that is that makes good on all of the sacrifices and challenges that its migrants have gone through before and during living here. So we can keep going. There's other films in here that show some of the nightlife. A film from the New Year's Ball in 1943 that features Mrs. Joe Louis. I'm not going to show that right now, just to kind of speak on another component of Raymond's films, which was his access to also international dignitaries that came to Chicago. So in addition to the more high, these social events that some of them are listed on this article, we received a bunch of new films. Now we have over 300 films in the collection, which we're still processing, that are opening up new ways to think about Chicago's and Black Chicago's importance. So one that I'll bring your attention to, this is the Artists and Models Ball from 1941 for Southside Community Arts Center. Please check that out. But I want to bring your attention to the visits by African leaders like Haile Selassie in 1954 to Chicago, his first diplomatic tour, Chicago's editorial class again, and has been very much in relationship with Ethiopia, and were instrumental in him coming here. Same thing with Kwame Nkrumah, which Raymond also has a brief film where he is pictured. But he also has a love for sports, and this is still a lot of the work that we have not yet processed, but we do have some films from tennis matches, particularly Althea Gibson's matches outside of Chicago and River Forest, where she won her first major U.S. trophy after winning Wimbledon and then going on to win the U.S. Open a few weeks later. So Raymond weaves, his films are helping us weave and understand stories of Black achievement during a period of time that are often obscured or only able to be talked about using still images or personal narratives. So we're very grateful for this visual record and being able to share it with you all, and hope that you will work with us in making these films more discoverable and more descriptively, contextually accurate for patrons that may make use of them. So I'll stop it there if that's okay. So Maya, thank you for the time.
Thank you, Saroop. There might be some questions in the chat, I'm not sure, or any questions in the room for Saroop while Saroop is here for us to ask questions. Are there any in the chat that out of anyone? Oh, there is. Someone is asking, I know you can see that, Saroop. Is there a map of the process you took to do this? It's a
yes, the research process. So currently, I'm mostly just using ProQuest, Chicago Defender archives as a primary source to just validate some of the information that we're seeing on the case labels, and then looking at secondary sources from there if some of these events are described. And we're also sharing these films with sometimes the institutions that still exist. So in February, we did a screening of the Artists and Models Ball, which was the first fundraiser for the Southside Community Arts Center at the Southside Community Arts Center. We screened that film. And in April, we have a lot of films of the Parkway Ballroom, the 1940s and 50s, and we'll be doing a screening there. So we are doing kind of a combination of primary source material and also community archiving through collected memories, and sometimes new materials do show up that way too.
Okay, there's two questions in the room. There's one in the
okay.
Hi, this is Susan Carlotta Ellis. How you doing today?
Hey, Susan.
I'm an original donor to this project, which is fundamentally important and very wonderful. So if you all have something hiding in your attics or basements, please, please donate them, because we can't see this go in the garbage any longer. I have a question. I'm so excited about the Raymond Williams because I know now it's 300. I think you were overwhelmed at 100, and so now it's 300. The swimsuit models, I thought about, oh my God, they're so gorgeous, and I'm hard pressed to find a swimsuit these days. So I'm gonna go look at that collection and see if I can get one made. But then I thought about not only BMRC and the African American Museum in DC, but I'm also wondering, have you contacted the Fashion Institute?
That's a great idea. I would love to be in touch with them. Yes, that would be great if anyone has a connection, or if would love to be to speak with them. That's ultimately how we imagine these films will, to get back to Jackie's point, how will they live? It's by taking them to the communities that value the aesthetics or the stories that they are bringing up the most. And so we'll be doing an activation for the Bud Billigan at the Bud Billigan this year, because we know that's the community that's really going to care about that. Just the same, we would love to have fashion designers look at these materials, because there are actually maybe 6 films that are just fashion shows. and like distinctly fashion shows and not related to the Miss Bronze pageant. But it would be priceless, I think, hopefully for some researchers.
Thank you. There's one more question.
Thank you. Hello, Doug Williams here, BMRC fellow from 2017. I was just delighted to see the sister of Raymond Williams, because actually I designed some landscape for her home property. She is one of the interim presidents at Chicago State University. In terms of cinema, we have some giants working in the city right now through CineSpace and others. And in terms of the city's funding of subsidies and things of that nature. And in fact, I'm glad my call time was pushed back until later so I could be here to be on the Shy. So have you reached out to some of those individuals for funding and resources or connections to foster these efforts?
Great question. So we have had a long practice of making the archive available to local artists that would like to creatively reuse the material to tell new stories. There's a section on our website that speaks about that practice and actually shows examples of what we, over now 20 episodes that we've created, called Spinning Home Movies. So generally we are open to licensing if the donors have given us that ability for the films to be shared that way. A lot of the films do end up in PBS, HBO, documentaries, things like this. But particularly for the Raymond Williams, we are still very early in the process of processing it. And the work of outreach and engagement, you know, I'm the only full-time person on the team. So we have one part-time processing archivist, and that's about it right now. So, you know, we're also working with students. So we're just limited still. So just to highlight kind of some of the early comments of there's many things that are here, and there's even more things that you all have. But how can we make them available is going to be it has to be another effort. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think we'll have to let Saroop go. Thank you. So appreciative that Saroop was able to join us. And Saroop just reminded me to say, you know, we need people to invest in this. We need the things. We also need people who are willing to fund salaried positions. I know it's unheard of, but someone has to do the work. Thank you so much, Saroop. And now people are clapping in the room for you. So
thank you. Thank you all.
Rebuild is about Black spaces matter, Black people matter, Black spaces matter, and Black objects matter, basically. And we have a bunch of different constellation of collaborative sites, including South Chicago, the Currency Exchange Cafe, Dorchester Arts and Housing Collaborative, Kenwood Gardens, and we have a forthcoming location, which a lot of these collections that we just spoke about will actually go and live there, is the St. Lawrence Arts Incubator. All right, let's get down to the nitty gritty about the Johnson Publishing Company Library Project. So I was brought in specifically to deal with the Johnson Publishing Company Library and its actual cataloging. So the Stony Island Arts Bank has this gorgeous library that was once in the Johnson Publishing Company building and was kind of a place of information for the many people who worked there, for whether it was to do research, but also a lot of times people would send you know, advanced copies, uncorrected proofs. A lot of authors would sign their things. So we had, you know, giving them to John Johnson or addressing them to John Johnson or other editors or writers in the building. It holds a significant amount of literature. So there's a lot of literary works where people sit their novels in, but it is a very well-rounded collection, all dedicated to African-American history, life, every topic that you can think of in the African and Black diaspora. There's content there on it. Many of the items in the library are in good condition, but some of them are in need of conservation, and some of them are in need of major repair. The library was initially, when it was at the John Johnson Publishing Company, it was cataloged in Dewey Decimal. One of the things that we've been doing with this project is that we're doing a total reclassification to Library of Congress. Probably a lot of people who are on the Zoom or in the room that are in archives in GLAM, you know that there's a move away from Dewey Decimal because of Melvin Dewey and the history of the racism and stuff. So I decided that that was a better way to go for this collection. And then you'll notice that there's the Johnson Johnson Publishing Company imprint. So just about all of their books are stamped with this actual imprint in the front of the cover. Okay, so here's some examples of the marginalia you see in the books. So this is the Harlem Book of the Dead, and it is signed by the authors. And then here is another example of an actual work by McCabe, Miriam McCabe, which, as you know, was married to Black Panther Carmichael. And she was renowned for her works in human rights and against apartheid, trying to do advocacy work for that, and just a legendary singer who was considered African mama, and apparently popularized African music across the globe, was the first person to do that. So here's an example of some of the ephemera that we're finding in materials. Here's Ishmael Reed's Reckless Eyeballing. And there's actually a photo card in there. It's not signed. There's actually an article from him that was tucked in, and also that publisher's release note. So a little bit about our project scope. Our goal is to make the library holdings browsable and accessible online. So in addition to us inventorying everything that's in the library, we're actually putting them into Content DM as a platform. And then we're also linking the holdings in WorldCat. Right now, we're midway through the project and we haven't turned on visibility, so you can't actually see our holdings. But once we're done, we'll flip the switch and you will be able to see everything that's in that library through WorldCat. So our general project objectives, as I said, is to create a full inventory of all the items in the library. Determine which items are rare. We are finding some things that are like, we are the only place that has that item. The publisher is the publisher is no longer in existence. We're finding things also that are original cataloging, like they were self-published and nobody has a record anywhere, whether it's on WorldCat or on Library of Congress. We're adding them to the content management platform, like I said, for discovery. And then we're also thinking about access conditions for materials conservation. So we're doing an actual brittle test or condition test when we pick things up, bend the page back. Is it breaking? Is it something that can stay on the shelf? And potentially if somebody wanted to flip through it, or is something we need to add conservation to, or we need to actually encapsulate. So, and then we're making notes of the actual marginalia and ephemera found inside the items. So for those who have dealt with maybe marginalia, sometimes people, when they sign things or they write notes, it's not necessarily legible. So we're working to try as much as possible to put that actual transcription into the actual item record. Okay, and so the broader goals, as I mentioned, is that we're reclassifying from Dewey Decimal to Library of Congress. We're also examining the problematic classifications. So some of the older materials are classified in ways that it's clearly there's bias, or there's it's improperly classified altogether. We're also going through and making sure we use preferred terminology that communities use to self-describe. I think that is where we need to be personally. And we're doing this while we're going to reclassify and inventory the project. We should actually do it right, and we should actually apply the subject headings that should be in there. Especially because there are works in the collection that are as old as the late 1800s, and we haven't tapped through everything yet, so I'm not quite sure that date may change. And then create a new stack map with the self ranges for finding materials. So we want to make sure that we also create a new map of the shelves and shelf ranges so that we can actually tell people where things are when they come to browse. And as I mentioned, link the holdings in WorldCat for discoverability. So Charles, do you want to take this part?
Sure.
Okay.
So as Heather was mentioning before, one of the things that we do with creating this digital database of like all the materials from the JPC Library Publishing Company is we have a process by which we take a look at seeing if things need conservation, repair, locating these items in larger databases like the Library of Congress and OCLC, which is WorldCat, and then looking at how the cataloging has been for these items previously and how do we include like more inclusive language, more appropriate terminology to actually describe what the contents of that book hold and entail. And so some of the things that we do looking up through the Library of Congress and WorldCat cataloging is that we log it into our content DM system with the support system of like Heather. Also, going to this next slide, and I'll show it in another slide as well, pulling up Library of Congress and WorldCat DM, but like we'll identify an object, print out the WorldCat and the Library of Congress sheets, look at make sure the publisher lines up to the copy that we have at Rebuild in the JPC Library collection, and then documenting that properly. So, and this is just some of the things that Heather was talking about when it comes to the assessment and direction of conservation, looking at the book material, what kind of like methods need to be happening for repair to make sure that that book is no longer damaged and it can actually be preserved in our collection. So this is one example of that happening.
The history of slavery and slave trade by Blake, and it, as you can see, was in really bad disarray. So to the next slide.
Mm-hmm. Another example.
So this is how we shored it up to kind of get it back on the shelf without doing too much to the integrity of the book. Mm-hmm. It's got a gorgeous cover, so we wanted to kind of make sure we could save that. And so now that item is stable and can actually go back on the shelf when we've cataloged it. And then there are some things that we just can't, like book repairs, in-house book repairs, not necessarily an art that is done by most people and anymore. And it's just, there's a level of what you can do with it. And this book has been taped together and the pages are falling out, and it's Booker T. Washington. And it's a gorgeous book, but it just is not in a state where I can actually do anything. Sorry. And I know I'm off screen. So what we wound up doing is the preservation measures that I just wrapped it in acid-free paper. We've already cataloged it, put a note in the system that it is, in a bad state, it can't be used. But also one of the things that we're doing is, this is in the public domain, right? I think if I'm correct, or if not, it is definitely on Happy Trust. And so we put a link in the record. So if someone wants to actually view this item, they can, because our copy is just not, it's not in a state that can actually be flipped through.
And this is an example of our original cataloging. These are books that we could not find in the Library of Congress or in OCLC. These might be books that only Johnson Publishing Company has. There's a lot of books like this. And as Heather was also mentioning about marginalia and ephemera earlier in these books, there are messages in there that are addressed to Bob Johnson and his wife, donating these books to that library. And like it holds a special place, I think, by them doing that. So we have to create these original cataloging sources within Content DM that we can't find these books anywhere else or in any other library system. This is just one example of that. And then this is another process another snapshot of our process of cataloging, recording, and uploading. On the right is Rebuild's Content DM about how we catalog books. And on the left Heather, if you could, that's Rebuild as well, right? With that content DM. I'm sorry, I can't see from over here.
That's us.
Yeah, that's us. Okay, that's us.
I'm the only librarian in the building, so an archivist in the building. So one of the things that I had to do with my team, which they're great, they're in the audience too. We're a team of 5, including me. I had to create a template for their metadata so that they would have a structure to kind of go against. They're pretty savvy and they know what to do, but just in case, it's always there for them. So creating a template was a really good way to actually get a team together that we could be on the same page and they would know what they needed to enter in the records for the metadata.
Again, this is just another example of like on the left side here, we have this is one of the books in our collection by Henry Lou Gates Jr. about Blacks in Latin America. And on the left side is kind of like some of the like subject headings that is classified under in WorldCat. The same classifications might apply to Library of Congress. And we would try to like, look at the publisher. What is the book about? What are the contents of it? What is it addressing? What subject material? What topics? And we try to dictate and determine whether there's a proper description for these books. And then if not, kind of like lean on Heather's support system of like addressing like what the book is actually about in order to put up an accurate description on our website at Rebuild about our collection items. And this is some of the collection of like some of the rare books that we have that there might not be a lot of copies around. Here is Amiri Baraka. And this is one of the social media posts that we had regarding our collections about what we have and what's available, and that you can look up and browse in the collected works. Mm-hmm.
So part of that cataloging process is that, as he just mentioned, there are those old like little labels that you use with the little label printer that you print out that are on the spine. We don't remove those. So what we do is put the new call number label on the front of the book. And the reason why we do that is because for those who have not visited the Stony Island Arts Bank, to understand that the Johnson Publishing Company Library is not just a library, but it's an exhibit, right? The stacks the shelves, the library was designed by Theaster Gates. It's using railroad tracks, and everything in it is also a visual. It's an artifact itself. And so what we want to do is also think about how we protect the integrity of how those books were when we received them as much as possible. So removing those things that basically kind of hint to them being rare and their archival value and the history of them being in the Johnson Publishing Company Library, I think it's important that we try not to remove those and then just work around them. If that makes sense. So we protect the integrity of what it stands for. So here's our estimated project timeline. So we are estimated to get this done in 16 months for 12,000 books. Check back in with me later and see if we get it done. We are working very hard though. So that is kind of our target deadline to wrap up and everything. So I'm really trying to make that goal. Project strategies and methodologies. Why are we approaching this project in this manner? So one of the things that we want to do is address the anti-Blackness in classification. I think it is a necessary thing to do. And I think that if we don't do it, then nobody else will. I think the combating of othering through removing racial descriptors except when it's pertinent. So we're getting away from putting certain racial descriptors in unless it's absolutely necessary. For example, if it's a book on African-American women's health, that would, need to have the African-American designation. But if it's something that is like literature that's about romance, I don't know why it would necessarily need that connotation to be like African-American romance, because we don't do the same thing for white people. We don't put European-American romance. So and then everything in our in the Johnson Publishing Company Library is uniquely positioned that it is mostly about African-American. So for where we don't need it, we don't need to put that descriptor in. This I'm using as an example because one of the things, this is about speeches and selected speeches and statements by Malcolm X. What it should have been cataloged as is not what it's been cataloged as. There's some subject headings in here to me that are problematic. So this is what we did, because to me that made more sense. It's normally speeches, addresses in American, right? I think Malcolm X was more about Black nationalism than he was civil rights. So, and then United States and race relations. So thinking about what those subject headings should be instead, rather than what people think they should be on the surface because they don't really understand, I think is important. Another thing that we run into in the collection is a lot of stuff is in PZ that should not be in PZ. If you know what PZ is for Library of Congress, it's juvenile bail letters. So we see a lot of works that are cataloged in PZ that are definitely not juvenile works or bail letters. A lot of times it could be an author who writes in both genres, because sometimes people will notice that an author writes children's books, but doesn't understand they also write other works, nonfiction, and so they'll pigeonhole stuff. But some of it is just a matter of that there's this expectation, and whoever that cataloger was put that connotation on it, and it's actually not correct. So we're actually going back and making sure we're putting stuff in the right classification section that it should be in. And then just remembering subject classification is, it's never been neutral, right? And it will never be neutral, because sometimes what we need to do is actually say what something is in both manners. And I think for Black folks, we really do need to we need to be able to self-describe, and we need other people to understand how to self-describe us, and for other BIPOC communities.
We have a lot of fiction collections at the Johnson Publishing Library as well, and within that collection. And one of the things that we notice is when it refers to LGBTQ fiction, the Library of Congress and the WorldCat, it specifically uses the term, and excuse me for our language here, say African American gay men or triangles when it comes to relations with other people. And we think one of the good things about working with Heather and a librarian, there's a style book for appropriate language to describe certain books and what they're about. And so if something is about romance fiction or LGBTQ relationships or certain different just personal relations, we went through those type of books and just properly updated them and described what the subject material was about. And that was what the slide was going to try to show, is how the WorldCat and Library of Congress labeled the books versus how Rebuild and JPC, we did it with our library team. So that's one of the things I wanted to point out, but I couldn't show it on the screen here. So I'm sorry about that. But yeah, just wanted to close it.
That's it. So we're just in the process of cataloging that collection and being thoughtful about how we catalog it, and taking this opportunity to decolonize where we can, and make it so that we have an accessible collection in the sense that people know what we have. Questions, comments?
Thank you. My question is that when you reclassify these books, I know you're moving from Dewey to LC, but you're also trying to put them under the correct subject heading, which may be totally different from what LC and WorldCat has. So basically, you may have a book that's in other people's collection, but the call numbers, are they similar?
If it's pretty much cataloged right, and shout outs to Doris and Doris Saunders, because they cataloged that library. So for the most part, it is pretty accurate. But I also know that during that time, they were relying on what we call the Anglo-American cataloging rules. And so it has changed a lot since we first started cataloging, and we're recognizing that even within those cataloging rules, there have been, subject classification, there's been some racism, right? So we're going in and we're checking that. And if it is different from that book, if it's different from that section, then it's different from that section. But you will still be able to know where it was, because we're not removing that label. But I think this is the perfect opportunity now to actually really think about how we classify. I'm also, some stuff has to be totally cut. And so that becomes me actually going through subject headings and actually recutting it all the way down. So we've found that with a couple of things where it's like, it's not even in the ballpark. So I have to actually go and look at use classification web and stuff like that, and need LLC large stack of subject classifications and go through and cut it again.
Thank you so much. We have to really move on. Our keynote. Thank you. Also, can we give him another hand?
Thank you so much, Samaya, and warmest greetings, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here, an honor to be here. So thank you for joining in today and for the honor and grace of your presence. Okay. The night of April 5th, 2012 rolled in hot. Indio, California, which lies in the Coachella Valley of Southern California's Colorado Desert region, about 2 hours east of Los Angeles, has a warm winter and hot summer desert climate. It's not Indio's climate, however, that makes it noteworthy. Instead, it is known for the numerous cultural events the city holds every year, most notably the Coachella Valley Music and Arts Festival. So every year without fail, the Coachella Festival draws huge crowds to Indio. The days-long festival features musical artists from many genres of music, including rock, pop, indie, hip-hop, and electronic dance music, as well as art installations and sculptures. So in 2012, 15 years, 7 weeks, and 3 days after he was pronounced dead from the 5 gunshot wounds he had sustained in Las Vegas, thousands of Coachella fans got a chance to see the impossible. For just under 5 minutes, people in the Indio Desert witnessed living history as Tupac Shakur took the stage and rocked the mic alongside Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre for a once-in-a-lifetime performance. The only problem was that this performance didn't happen during Tupac's lifetime. Even though he had passed away in 1996, his likeness had been resurrected from the dead as a digital projection on stage, giving viewers a chance to experience an ephemeral moment from the past, a live Tupac concert. But as Aisha Harris remarked in a June 2017 Slate article, looking like Tupac is not the same as acting like Tupac. The resurrection of Tupac Shakur is one of the many stories and cases that I explore in my book, Resurrecting the Black Body, which is an analysis of anti-Black digital violence and Black digital afterlives. While this book looks at the ways the Black community has been harmed in digital spaces, the heartbeat of this work is its contribution to the project of Black liberation, especially in spaces where that liberation is premised on empowering Black techno-social futures. To help frame the conversation, I should also say that I mainly approach this work from my training in history, as well as archival, information, cultural, and performance studies. So this project has its roots in the information ecosystem I was living in during the hurricane season in the fall of 2005. To be honest with you, I found myself completely overwhelmed in the midst of the television and internet footage of Hurricane Katrina and the aftermath of the storm. On every screen I turned to, there were dead Black bodies floating in the overflowing waters of Lake Pontchartrain, dead Black bodies floating in the streets of my beloved city, New Orleans. Those images stayed with me, they haunted me, they deeply saddened me. And so nearly a decade later, when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri, I was horrified to see that law enforcement had left his dead body in the middle of the street to rot in the hot August sun. I was even more horrified when I learned that during that time, his remains were photographed, and those photographs were posted to the internet. I was immediately taken back to Katrina, and it occurred to me that there must be reasons that the dead bodies that I was seeing so displayed so callously on television and online were overwhelmingly Black bodies, Black people's bodies, There must be reasons that anti-Blackness for entertainment purposes and in digital spaces continues even after a person dies. There must be reasons that anti-Blackness has not only a digital life, but a digital afterlife. And so I set out to find out what those reasons were. And today, in our brief time together, I'd like to share some of that journey with you. So I want to begin by considering what it means that records created during the era of expansive colonial power and chattel slavery have moved to online environments, what I call the digital afterlives of slavery era archives. The archives of Atlantic slavery were created by colonizers and slaveholders. Rather than being faithful representations of the colonized and the enslaved, they are a deeply complex, fraught, and often problematic set of sources that speak to how archives hold, produce, and reproduce agency, privilege, and power. The mass digitization and datafication of slavery-era archives has arguably contributed to a distancing of the lived experiences of enslaved people from what we imagine slavery to have been. Slavery's historical imaginary, if you will. This distancing leaves a huge temporal gap between the violence of the past and the visual experience of the present. And then two things typically happen. First, if you encountered the same record in a more material, visceral, and tactile way, you would have more immediacy in terms of the trauma that you are bearing witness to. There's a reason that people stand in line to see their Declaration of Independence at Independence Hall, right? There's something about the immediacy of that experience. And then the second thing that happens is that the now digital distanced version of the record that document that trauma are bestowed with new afterlives, often circulating independent of any historical context. So for example, the Lillenquist family collection of Civil War photographs at the Library of Congress, which documents both the Union and the Confederacy during the American Civil War, boasts a very robust collection of cartes de visite. In one, a shirtless man is seated sideways in his chair with his back to the camera. Stop, let me know when this starts to sound familiar. His face is in profile, his left hand resting on his hip with his elbow out to the side, accentuating the shape of his very muscular back. His back, which is clearly meant to be the focal point of the image, is covered in a network of thick, knotted keloid scars. Printed on verso are the words, "From Life," taken at Baton Rouge, Louisiana, April 2nd, 1863. Also on verso is a hand-scrawled note that reads, "I have found a large number of the 400 contrabands examined by me to be as badly lacerated as the specimen represented in the enclosed photograph." In November 2015, a nearly identical carte de visite was sold by Boston-based auction house Skinner Auctioneers for about $8,000. On verso, this card displays a typescript text on a separate piece of paper attached to the card's surface, and the typed text reads in part, "10 days from today, I left the plantation. Overseer Aritu Carrier whipped me. I was 2 months in bed sore from the whipping, and my sense began to come. I was sort of crazy. I tried to shoot everybody. They said so. I did not know. I did not know that I had attempted to shoot everyone. They told me so. I burned up all my clothes, but I don't remember that. I was never this way before. I don't know what made me come that way. I did not shoot anyone. I did not harm anyone. Whipped 2 months before Christmas." The very words of poor Peter taken as he sat for his picture. This text that appears on the back of this portrait is the documented written record of oral testimony given by Gordon, also known as Peter. Gordon, the man whose image appears in these two archival cartes de visite, was an enslaved man who self-emancipated in March 1863 from a plantation in St. Landry Parish, Louisiana, after having barely survived the savage beating that produced the scars on his back. Gordon reported the 10-day journey to be perilous. He was on foot, he was barefoot, he had been chased by several men and a pack of bloodhounds, and he was in dire fear for his life. When he reached the Union Army encampment along the Mississippi, he was mustered into military service, and the Union Army conducted a surgical examination. During the exam, they saw his scourged back, and two itinerant photographers photographed the scars. So on the 4th of July that year, the scourged back portrait and two other Gordon portraits appeared as wood engravings in a special Independence Day feature in Harper's Weekly, paired with a brief narrative about Gordon. The scourged back portrait of Gordon, presented alongside Gordon's own narrative, was well received, and photography studios throughout the American North began to duplicate and sell printed prints of the scourged back as a pop culture carte de visite. So in the past few years, this image has also become the inspiration for a movie, Emancipation, starring Will Smith as Gordon. The carte de visite of Gordon quickly became an early example of the eventual widespread dissemination and circulation of ideologically abolitionist photographs, particularly among white Americans in the North. They were trying to depict the social ills of human enslavement. Among Black abolitionists, however, a completely different narrative started to emerge, and this included Frederick Douglass. Black abolitionists like Douglass argued that while photographs and other images might serve to demonstrate the fundamental humanity of enslaved people and subvert anti-Black racism, seductive new technologies such as photography should be employed as a means of making politically minded abolitionist points about the individual humanity of Black people. And even though the photograph of Gordon is absolutely a powerful visual testimony to the brutality of American slavery, we can see, we heard it from Gordon's own testimony on the Skinner carte de visite, that formerly enslaved people were perfectly capable of testifying on their own behalf. We did not need other people to speak for us. Not then and not now. For archives and for those who use them, digitization is often presented as a panacea for problems of archival preservation and access. Providing broad access to digitized artifacts, however, especially in the longer term, is oftentimes problematic. These problems, when they arise, are not only technological, they are also economic, political, legal, and moral. Digital technologies and the new artifacts that they produce can themselves result in expressions of anti-Blackness. So, for example, the image of Gordon has enjoyed, again, a new popularity online because of the recent film directed by Antoine Fuqua and starring Will Smith entitled Emancipation. The movie, which is billed as a biopic, is loosely based on the story of Gordon/Peter and follows his journey through the swamps of Louisiana and the photographing of the scars on his back. The digitized image has appeared on news sites, personal sites, social media, and in other locations on the internet without the descriptive context that the Library of Congress site provides, right? So now it's appearing completely out of any kind of historical context. So in Fuqua's retelling of Gordon's narrative, the character of Gordon asks the photographers, "Why are you doing this?" To which the photographer responds with reverence and kind of aplomb, "So the world might know what slavery truly looks like." Joey McFarland, the film's producer, modern-day hater of slavery, and our white savior, has offered us Emancipation as the great white hope, despite proffering a film that requires its viewers to sit through 2+ hours of Black degradation. And here he is talking about the image and its history.
How you came to own the photo, and why it was important for you to, once you did,
I have the photo. This is the original photograph from 1863. And I wanted it to be here tonight. I wanted a piece of Peter to be here tonight. Sadly, it's sadly to say so many artifacts and photographs have not been preserved or curated or respected. And I took it upon myself to curate and build a collection for future generations. You know, I've been collecting for, a very long time. My collection will be donated at the end of my life for educational purposes. And it's something I just want to give back. But for me, my love of history, my love of truth my love of larger than life individuals that had an impact on not just some people's lives, but the world. It's worth fighting for. It's worth preserving. It's worth seeking out and protecting. And that's what I thought to do. And the story that came out of that, it transcends entertainment. It transcends cinema. It is a lesson. It is a conversation that is needed. It needs to start and continue and keep growing and evolving. And we just need to come together, and we need to reckon with the past so future generations don't make the same mistake.
He brought the picture with him, y'all. Okay, exactly. So it is offense enough on its face that McFarland thinks he discovered this image and this story, that he would be audacious enough to hold the image of another human being's degraded body next to his own like a souvenir or fetish object is actually just a bridge too far. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. So while still thinking about the archives and sort of problematizing a little bit, I'd like to offer the work of Katherine Dunham as a contrast to emancipation and as an antidote to the approach that McFarland took to his historical subjects around issues of representation, memory, and what is ultimately our collective obligation to recognize that the person in the image is deserving of better and deserving of more. In 1935, aspiring anthropologist Katherine Dunham was awarded a prestigious fellowship to conduct field work in the Caribbean. Dunham, who would go on to complete her anthropology degree here at the University of Chicago in 1936, was also a dancer and choreographer, and so her field work in the Caribbean was animated by a really profound interest in the dances of the African diaspora. Dunham's fieldwork led her on a journey through the Caribbean where she studied the survival of traditional African dance in the face of European colonization and acculturation. She began in Jamaica and then traveled to Martinique and to Trinidad and Tobago with the goal of gaining a deeper understanding of Shango, an African god significant in Caribbean religious culture. In early 1936, Dunham arrived in Haiti, where for several months she continued her investigation of rhythm and dance as they applied to her own ethnic and cultural background. So when she entered the University of Chicago, Dunham had also begun teaching her own style of dance as a means of exploring her theoretical beliefs about the rhythms of people from the African diaspora. As a scholar, she theorized that Caribbean thought and movement, particularly for those of African descent, were directly correlated to that of their African forebears. Because she was nervous about the disappearance of dances from many tribal and folk communities and dedicated to dance as a means of crafting new Afrocentric historical narratives, Dunham recorded her findings by both writing and sketching ethnographic field notes and by learning the dance techniques, songs, and music that were shared with her during her journey throughout the Caribbean. Dunham was among the first anthropologists to use participant observation as a method, and her intentions for doing so were motivated by her desire to use her dance anthropology to address the myriad dilemmas of racism, including the loss of cultural memory that she saw facing Black Americans in the United States, especially here in Chicago. Dunham believed that American slavery had broken cultural bonds and created cultural disruptions. And in her work, she was really dedicated to her work being a restorative project. So she eventually turned her anthropological work into a pedagogy called the Dunham Technique. Okay, so Dunham was deeply concerned with not only preserving the practice of Dunham technique, but also documenting her own process. On one hand, Dunham technique is encoded in the bodies of those who dance it. On the other, Dunham maintained physical artifacts, the kind that are typically held in Western archival repositories. So for example, she was among the first to use film to document dance traditions in the Caribbean, as well as to document and preserve her own technique. As early as the mid-1930s, Dunham was using a Kodak 16mm camera to record her field studies in the Caribbean in what was at the time yet another really innovative approach to anthropological fieldwork. She asserted that to capture the meaning in the culture, the life of the people, she felt she had to take something directly from the people and develop that. And so on the experience of filming, actually filming the work, this is what she has to say.
and how we were connected what ceremony it was I was allowed to see. And of course it was rather difficult for me because already I was infringing on some of their taboos by being there. Some of the time I was where women were not normally permitted to be. Some of the time I was where outsiders and strangers were not permitted to be. And I had to overcome that, and at the same time, they did not know what was in this box there, he pointed at them. But like most people in society, other than their own, they don't like to have things pointed at them. And I had to find a way to fix that camera so it could be taking in, recording what they were doing without making them uncomfortable. And this was my big task. I have yelled at some of their times where I still film until I'm intuitive.
So though Dunham was to a certain extent allowed participatory access into ritual life in the Caribbean that the largely white and predominantly male ethnographic anthropology establishment at the time could never attain, from her own words, you can hear her discomfort, right, with the possibility of her recordings intruding into and interfering with the sacred practices of her Caribbean interlocutors. Today, however, along with the scourged back photograph of Gordon Peter, these moving images reside at the Library of Congress, where they comprise one element of the Katherine Dunham archival collection. The moving images and sound recordings were purchased from Dunham herself by Library of Congress in 2001 as part of the Katherine Dunham Legacy Project. Dunham's intent in transferring the materials to the Library of Congress was again part of a two-pronged strategy to preserve her anthropological dance work. She viewed her dance work and Dunham technique as an archives in and of itself, and she sought to ensure that the process by which she had created this dance work was also documented and more formally preserved. That Dunham entrusted almost the entirety of her life's work to the Library of Congress speaks to her extraordinary trust in the library as a government institution, despite having had a very promising career thwarted by the very same government in 1951. And I can answer questions about that in the Q&A if you have them. I understand this to mean that Dunham believed in institutions like the Library of Congress in as much as the basis for their very existence is to serve the common good. What Dunham could not have anticipated was that the Library of Congress would put these recordings online in an open access format, bypassing the permission of those whose sacred practices were documented in her films. In a long tradition of open rather than appropriate access, archivists at the Library of Congress likely did not take into consideration what might be sacred or secret practices before posting these videos online. Neither did they consider the specificity of context under which Dunham was granted permission to view and record, or the nuance of Dunham's own stated mixed comfort with the process of recording. Instead, a fair use application of copyright was privileged over the notion of permission, which is not only an aspect of the work that Dunham documented, but also an important spiritual and practical praxis in Black memory work. Look, no one can predict the future, but Black memory work does have a really important relationship with the past. Black memory workers recognize the historical patterns of abuse and work through such modes as agency, autonomy, refusal, and commitment to mitigate against and prevent future abuses. The dances that Dunham created and the cultures and the people who comprise those cultures deserve to be remembered, absolutely. And they also deserve to have the terms of that remembrance be disentangled from the Western white supremacist histories of American archivy. Herein lies the promise and possibility of Black memory work, that what remains might be treated with both care and respect, that Black memories and the right of Black people to be remembered might not automatically be deployed in anti-Black ways in an anti-Black world. Which unfortunately leads me back to Tupac. So born in Brooklyn in 1971, American rapper Tupac Shakur is consistently ranked as one of the greatest and most influential rappers of all time. I'm a fan. Shakur's shooting and subsequent death in 1996 was a devastating loss to his family and friends, to be sure, but also to the Black community that he loved and that loved and supported him. And of course, it was a very tremendous loss to hip hop. Then in 2012, 16 years after Tupac's death, he was billed as a performer at Coachella, like billed as a performer. The Tupac that performed at Coachella in 2012 was, of course, not the real Tupac, just like the Whitney Houston that's performing at Harrah's in Las Vegas is not the real Whitney Houston. Rather, they are holograms or digital resurrections of Tupac and Whitney, and Michael Jackson has also had one of these done posthumously. These illusions themselves are nothing new. Holography and other 3D technologies, as well as 2D illusions, have been used for centuries to create lifelike reproductions of human bodies, reproductions that are capable of addressing an audience, moving around on stage, and interacting with others using pre-scripted effects. Digital resurrection is a modern phenomenon that uses a combination of innovative technologies, digital manipulations, and marketing appeal to construct a domain in which the deceased appear in new contexts as though alive today, and in some cases, as though consciously aware of their own demise. And while many have touted the promise of digital resurrection technologies to extend life and liberate humanity from the inevitability of death, I argue that these are carceral technologies that work to create a specular prison, one in which spectacle goes hand in hand with carcerality, in which there is a kind of ghost slavery. Archival scholar Randall Jimerson theorizes that there are three types of collecting institutions: the temple, the prison, and the restaurant. While temple institutions are collecting institutions in which the archivist preserves the original interpretation of items or collections, restaurant institutions, by contrast, are institutions where the archivist guides the user, allowing them to make their own decisions and allowing the collections and items to speak for themselves. In prison institutions, however, the archivist serves only the interpretations of an oppressive higher power. If we consider the Tupac hologram as a record, it is of the type that belongs to the carceral archives of Jimerson's prison institutions. The posthumous hologram as record serves commercial interests, souvenir and fetish cultures, othering, spectacle, and whiteness as higher powers. Holopac is a carceral artifact, imprisoned by the archives of folklore and of longing, and digitally incarcerated by white supremacy's need to possess and control Black people's bodies. It is an artifact that is tangled up in a very ancient pain. As Simone Brown tells us, this is what happens when certain bodies are rendered as digitized code through technologies such as facial recognition, iris and retinal scans, hand geometry, fingerprint templates, vascular patterns, gait and other kinesthetic recognition, and increasingly DNA. All of these ultimately treat the body as evidence that supersede individuals' accounts of who they are and whether and where they belong. Tupac might have been reconstituted and resurrected, but he has not been reincarnated by the digital. He does not get a second chance at life. Rather, his death has been co-opted and commercialized. He has no agency over his digital remains. Tupac is dead. And as we've learned from Hollywood, from the emergence of AI and from deepfake technologies, he retains no right to how he is represented in death, and no right to refuse any kind of misrepresentation. I want to be really clear that we should continue to expect to see AI technologies intersecting with the digital afterlife. One example is through AI chatbot services offered by companies like Luca, the creators of Replica. Replica is the brainchild of San Francisco tech star Eugenia Cuida, who in late 2015 lost her best friend, Roman Mazurenko, in a car accident. Cuida and Roman had, over the course of their friendship, exchanged literally thousands of text messages. And in her grief, Cuida found herself reading through the messages she'd sent and received from Roman, and it occurred to her that embedded in all of those messages, Roman's turns of phrase, his patterns of speech, were traits intrinsic to what made him Roman. And so Eugenia Cuida decided to take all of this data and use it to build a digital version of her now dead bestie, Roman. Using the chatbot structure that she and her team had been developing for her company, Luca, Quita poured all of Roman's messages into a Google-built neural network, which is just a type of AI system that uses statistics to find patterns in the data, whether they're images or text or audio. And she used that to then create a Roman bot with which she could interact, whether to reminisce about past events or to have entirely new conversations. The resulting bot was, according to Quita, eerily accurate. And so Luca decided to make a version that anyone could talk to, whether they knew Roman or not. The response Quita and her team received from users interacting with the bot, people who had never met Roman, was startling. And so in March of 2021, Luca released a new type of chatbot on Apple's App Store. Using the same structure the team had used to build the digital Roman bot, they created a system to enable anyone to build a digital representation, and they called it Replica. So Replica is, at its core, a front-end data collection tool. It is there to collect data from you. And then that is sort of thinly veiled, that data collection tool sort of thinly veils efforts to use that data that you feed it to construct an automated decision system, one that then makes claims that it can help humans remember how to be human. Okay. So please meet Fabi. Fabi, which is short for fabrication, is a replica that I created for research purposes and also to share with you today so that you could better understand some of the tools and technologies that make up the digital immortality practices that I'm kind of critiquing here today. There are several selection options when you first create a replica, and the replica knows nothing at all about, replica itself knows nothing about you, the creator, until much later in the process. So as a creator, you have the option to select skin tone, gender, hairstyle, eye color. You can't select clothing or any other kind of individual sort of expression. There's nothing that says that you must create a replica of yourself or that any of your personal attributes must be incorporated into the replica that you fashion. I chose to make Fabi a Black woman because I am a Black woman and I know what it means to embody that experience. It would not matter, however, whether I was a Black woman or an Asian woman or a white man. Everyone can be or have a Black friend with replica. In other words, replica makes it possible to kind of try on Blackness. In this case, it makes it possible to attempt to digitally embody a Black woman's experience. This phenomenon, another clear example of the fetishization of Blackness, is increasingly common in digital environments. With roots in colonial projects, the practice known as digital blackface has become a far-reaching phenomenon. As new AI tools and technologies have made it possible, for example, to create digital facsimiles of actual deceased Black people, facsimiles that mimic their antemortem counterparts to such a degree that they are characterized by their ability to communicate from beyond the grave. They text, they instant message, they post on social media. A deeper critical analysis and intervention seems imperative. The image on the screen now is of Frederick Douglass, who, as I mentioned earlier in our time together, had very strong feelings about how photography could and should be used in terms of abolition and representations of Black life. He also had very strong feelings about how his own image could and should be used. And just say, this is not it. This is not what he had in mind. It may or may not go. But if you haven't seen this already, it's Deep Nostalgia is the technology, and they work with Ancestry, and somebody used the Deep Nostalgia technology to animate Frederick Douglass's face. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So when Catherine Dunham transferred her physical archival materials to the Library of Congress, the films documenting her Caribbean research would have been made available for viewing at the Library of Congress using a preservation copy. How could Dunham possibly have anticipated that the portion of her memory work, the sacred practices documented therein, that she put in the capable institutional hands of the Library of Congress would find their way to Trayvon Martin's internet, i.e. the same internet that wantonly circulates images of Black death for profit. The current affordances of the digital came to pass just as Catherine Dunham was experiencing her own rite of passage. When Dunham died at the age of 96 in May 2006, the images of Black bodies in the overflowing waters of Lake Pontchartrain in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina were ushering in a fresh new hellscape. Dunham's death preceded the murders of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, and the exploitation of Black bodies on the internet for profit was in its nascency. Would this later knowledge have impacted Dunham's decisions about the conditions governing access and use for parts of the collection at the Library of Congress? This is ultimately not knowable, but what is knowable is that the people who appear in her anthropological videos, again, did not consent to have their sacred work and spiritual practices be made widely available on the internet. It is vitally important that Black people participate in the process of establishing what is sacred, what should be withheld from the white gaze, what can be made public, and under what circumstances. It is vital that decisions be made about what is appropriate in terms of access, not just what is legal or binding. It is also vital that there is a recognition that the Black community is not a monolith by any means. The heterogeneity of the Black community means different access will be appropriate at different times for different people. So in closing, I will argue, as I always do, that if you want to respect Black life and the lived experiences of Black people, part of the process is resisting the urge to resurrect Black bodies for entertainment, for commercial use, for any purpose. How the ordinary and extraordinary Black people I have talked about today lived, how they died, how they are remembered, how their digital remains are constituted, and what happens to those remains is forever intimately linked to systemic and structural practices of anti-Black and often state-sponsored violence, a violence that is too frequently reinscribed and reified in and also justified by the archival record. If you want to honor Black lives, please let us rest in peace. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I hope we have questions. Is everyone we're just in awe, we can't.
Hello. Oh, okay. Greetings, Dr. Sutherland. Amazing performance. My name is Nia. I'm a PhD student in ethnomusicology at IU Bloomington. And so my question kind of comes out of that world. And I was just curious to hear your thoughts around the digital afterlife and digital resurrection in regards to sampling. And I'm particularly thinking about Kendrick Lamar's use of Tupac's voice or Mortal Man and how he brings it up in that way. So I would just love to hear your thoughts and if you feel there's a difference when there's kind of this intracommunal use of engaging with this idea of Black life and death.
It's a fantastic question, Nia. Thank you. So the Tupac hologram was originally like Afeni Shakur signed off on it. His mother signed off on it. And so, I think that originally that hologram was meant to be a celebration, a recognition, a bringing back in, right, of a voice, a sampling of sorts. That it was presented, though, at Coachella, consumed by a white audience, billed for a white audience, right? And then if you can see any of the footage from that actual performance, you can see that the audience is they don't know what to do with it, right? It's straight out of the uncanny valley. Everybody's a little thrown by this digitally resurrected Tupac. And so after Coachella, Tupac's mom was like, nah, never again. That thing never sees the light of day again. And it has been relegated to his own family, personal archives, the archives of his estate, right? And so I feel the same way about it, right? It's, there were permissions, and I feel like that's a really important part of the process. Permission was asked, permission was granted. Intentions were good, execution was poor, and a retraction was made. And I think, there's something about accountability in that process, and also being able to acknowledge when mistakes have been made, right? And so I don't know if permission was granted by Tupac's estate to Kendrick Lamar to do those samples. And that's the first question that I would have, right? Who gave you permission, right? From where did your permission come? Did you ask permission to work like this in this space with these materials? Yeah, thank you. That's such an important question.
Yes, I was just see. Oh, we have one here then. Again.
Just real quick, how did the person buy that photograph of Peter?
It was up for auction, so it somehow ended up in private hands, and then that whoever the private owner was put it up for auction at the Skinner auction house.
In the Library of Congress?
Oh. So you mean the producer of the movie, McFarlane. I'm not sure how he came into possession of that copy. So more than one print exists. But no, he doesn't have the Library of Congress's copy.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I guess one of the conclusions that you had was, you were interrogating maybe the ethics of archives. Do you have maybe a reframing? Do you think the ethical code that we have is adequate? Or do you think that there needs to be a reframing of it for anti-Blackness? Or what recommendation would you make to archivists about the appropriate ethics when you're approaching, Black cultural heritage and artifacts?
I mean, I think so often decisions are made again without consulting people in community. And I feel like that's a huge problem, right? There are so many projects out there, collecting projects, documentation projects, people making promises like McFarlane to then donate his personal collection to archives. And it's all whiteness having a conversation about, right? And I think all of this work needs to be done in community. And I think there needs to be an acknowledgement that in a lot of ways, Black memory work, which has been a longstanding centuries, generations long tradition, may not always align with brick and mortar boxes and shelves, archival spaces, right? I work with an archivist from Jamaica, and he was talking about how he's inherited this practice around birth certificates, right? But the birth certificates themselves are colonial documents. There's information that must be recorded about who your father was, right? And if you were born out of wedlock, that must be noted, right? And all of the kind of details that this document is looking for has nothing to do with how Jamaicans actually recognize and celebrate birth. A tree gets planted, and that tree is then linked to your homeland and becomes part of your ancestral inheritance, right? It has nothing to do with this birth certificate document. And so I think recognizing that there may need to be two spaces or two practices, or that, inclusion in spaces that were not designed for us may not be something that we should always be working toward.
We have someone online who's going to speak and ask their question.
Yes, thank you so much. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello there. Thank you so much for, first of all, this amazing symposium. And Dr. Sutherland, thank you as well for your presentation. I truly appreciate your naming around the need to do memory keeping work within the Black community that is outside of, that is beyond, and perhaps that is even critical of the white gaze and like the need for white supremacy to always have its hands in every Black narrative, whether it is Black life or Black death. And I'm wondering for you, as you're having, let me see, I found it is something that as a student of as a budding student of archiving, I've been trying to incorporate that into my practice, into figuring out in the short and long term, how do I make sure that the stories that I'm gathering reach other Black people, but also that they do not reach beyond Blackness in ways that I may not want them to. What I'm finding sometimes when I'm having those conversations, there's a point of tension within the memory keeping world, because I think there's a sense of we want these memories to be disseminated as widely as possible. So even with other Black people, there's a sense of, but if you keep it in-house, then it doesn't get as far as they may need to be. And I'm just wondering if you have been encountering any tension within your field or with other archivists about this concept of perhaps not every Black story needs to exist beyond whiteness, beyond Blackness, and how you navigate those tensions if they come up.
Yes. And those tensions are real. And I think oftentimes they come up when we are not having a more nuanced conversation about the materials in our care and about appropriate access, right? We're not saying don't digitize anything. I'm not advocating for closed collections. I'm not, for all of our collections to be closed collections. That's hardly the case, but there are sensitive materials. And I think we can honestly take a lead from our Indigenous brothers and sisters in terms of some of the systems that they've set up, like Makurtu, and some of the ways that they handle intra and extra community access to materials, depending on what kind of role you occupy in the community, whether or not you are actually a community member, you have access to different levels of, or you have different levels of access to collections and materials. And sometimes that's, broken down by gender, or are you an elder? And I don't have all of the answers, but I do think that these are the conversations that we need to be having, the more nuanced conversations, and not just, it's not an all or nothing proposition.
We're so honored. I'm so honored that you all stuck with us today. And I'm so honored that everyone came and shared with us. This really was a community symposium. Thank you, Tonia, for coming. And I don't know if there's any kind of last questions just in general about the BMRC or about today, but please be in contact if you do have questions, either with the presenters or with myself, with the BMRC. We want to keep this going. We want to get this work done. There's a lot of work to be done, as we can see from the presenters today. So can we just give our keynote one more last round of applause?
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to our other presenters, such inspiring work, and I'm taking so much back with me, and I can't wait to remain in conversation. So thank you very much, Smee. I'm tremendously grateful to have been included. Thank you so much.
So I think we'll end it for everyone online. Oh, wow. So everyone online, thank you. And we're ending it now. And please be on the lookout for all the kind of new and exciting things the BMRC will be doing. And have a good rest of your day. And thank you all.